This is the leader of Hamas, an Iran-backed organization on the U.S. terrorist list. He recently praised Osama bin Laden, calling the al-Qaeda leader a holy warrior. The official Hamas charter sets as their goal to kill the Jews. Now, Palestinian leader Abbas has joined with Hamas and turned his back on peace talks. They demand a Palestinian state, but with the Hamas charter pledging to kill the Jews, what kind of state will it be?
The trade centers here in New York have been hit by airplanes.
The V sign for victory being displayed in East Jerusalem today among jubilant Palestinians that the United States had been subject to this attack. Look at this. We're seeing people applauding, clapping, smiling, happy to know that thousands of Americans have died in this sneak attack. And there you see a V for victory sign.
Let me express to you the difficulty of trying to explain Israel's security predicament to the citizens of the United States, a country that's 500 times the size of Israel. So I thought how I could best bring it home. And I asked you to imagine that the territory of the United States was compressed down to the size of New Jersey. You put on New Jersey's northern border an Iranian terror proxy called Hezbollah, which fires 6,000 rockets into that small state. Then imagine that this terror proxy amasses another 50,000 rockets to fire at you. Now, I'm not finished. You take New Jersey's southern border and you put another Iranian terror proxy on it, and you call it Hamas. And it too fires 6,000 rockets into your territory while smuggling even more lethal weapons into its territory. You think you'd feel a little vulnerable? You'd think you'd expect some understanding from the international community when you have to defend yourself? I think any fair-minded person would recognize that we face security problems and challenges unlike any other nation on earth. And therefore, a peace agreement with the Palestinians must have effective security arrangements on the ground, not just on a piece of paper, on the ground. We must make sure that what happened in Lebanon and Gaza doesn't happen again in the West Bank.
Every state has the right of self-defense and to secure borders to protect itself from hostile invasions and terror. Israel is a small state surrounded by Arab countries 650 times its size. After the Six-Day War in 1967, when Israel was attacked by 4 armies on 3 fronts, United Nations Security Council Resolution 242 stated that Israel was entitled to new defensible borders to replace the previous fragile lines from which it was attacked. What are Israel's defensible borders? What are its essential security needs? The growing threat of global jihad activity near Israel's borders requires it to prevent infiltrations of terrorists and weapons. When Israel left the Philadelphia corridor in Gaza, it became a highway for the infiltration of terrorists and the flow of hundreds of tons of ammunition and weaponry from all over the Arab world, aimed at Israeli civilians. The Jordan Valley is the equivalent of Gaza's Philadelphia corridor in the West Bank. To defend itself, Israel must retain control over the Jordan Valley. Missiles launched from the Judean hills pose an immediate threat to Jerusalem, Israel's capital. Israel's only international airport, Ben Gurion, would be in the range of even primitive rockets, while all planes taking off and landing would be threatened by shoulder-launched anti-aircraft missiles. More advanced weaponry would be able to hit virtually any point in Israel. If Israel were forced back to the 1949 armistice lines, the Green Line, the country's width would be reduced to a narrow 9-mile waistline that would be impossible to defend. That's why any future arrangement must include Israeli control over key areas of the mountain ridge and a demilitarized Palestinian state. Israel's narrow borders means a combat aircraft can cross the entire country in under 4 minutes. In less than 2 minutes, an enemy plane could penetrate the country's airspace via the Jordan Valley and reach Jerusalem. Therefore, Israel must be able to identify hostile planes before they cross the Jordan River line and intercept them shortly after. To defend itself, Israel must control the airspace over the West Bank. Israel's transportation arteries, and in particular the Trans-Israel Highway, enable travel and connection between Israel's regions. Protection of these vital arteries is essential in order to ensure that 1. Civilians aren't victims of terrorist gunfire. 2. Regions of the country cannot easily be cut off. 3. The mobility of Israel's defense forces is not hindered in the case of invasion. There is enormous uncertainty about future trends in the Middle East. Iran is determined to become the supreme power as the U.S. withdraws from Iraq. No one can guarantee the future of many of the current regimes in the region. Today, more than ever, it is crucial to ensure defensible borders for Israel.
Has her nuclear weapons, the balance of forces in the Middle East will change entirely. Within days, a blanket of fear will be spread over the neighboring Arab countries. Egypt, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and countries of the Persian Gulf will not have a choice but to cut off any and all alliances with the U.S. They will be forced to obey every command coming from the oppressive dictatorship of Iran. Everyone will know now who is calling the shots. The fear-paralyzed Islamic Middle East will now be sucked into becoming puppet nations of Iran. The Middle East will never be the same again. Iran will become the leader of the Arab world, the renewed Persian Empire. Now that the entire oil of the Middle East is controlled by Iran, America and Europe will be forced to do anything to appease Iran. When Iran threatened, at the time which I will decide Europe will freeze in the winter, it was just a very small preview of the fear and panic that will terrorize all the nations of the world.
This is Andrew Klavan on The Culture. In an effort to bring peace to the Middle East, President Barack Obama has proposed that Israel should return to its 1967 borders in exchange for being annihilated by its enemies. This would be an extension of the brilliant 2005 trade-off, in which Israel gave up control of the Gaza Strip in return for being relentlessly attacked by rocket fire, while Palestinians voted to give leadership in the territory to Hamas, a terrorist organization bent on Jewish genocide. Achieving the so-called two-state solution, a proposal that would bring about lasting peace by dividing the area fairly between the Israelis and those who have sworn to exterminate them if it's the last thing they ever do. That's why today, we here at Klavan on the Culture would like to lay out what we consider the only plan likely to bring tranquility, freedom, and justice to the region. The one-state solution, in which the entire Middle East is given to the Jews. That's right. The one-state solution is a proposal of genius that would not only help the Palestinians, but would instantly achieve the noblest goals of the so-called Arab Spring. For instance, turning the entire Middle East into one big Israel will secure religious freedom for everyone in the area. As things stand, Muslim states either ban other religions completely or torment their practitioners to the point of extinction. Not so Israel. Although Jimmy Carter and other leftists pretending not to be anti-Semites have accused Israel of practicing religious apartheid, the fact is Muslims and Christians have full freedom of religion in the Jewish state. They can and do vote and serve in the Israeli parliament and Supreme Court. They can and do volunteer to serve in the Israeli Defense Forces. And only under the Jews are the religious sites of the Holy Land open to all. Indeed, once the entire Middle East becomes Israel, most of the region's Arabs will be freer and better off in every way than they've ever been before. The United Nations reports that Israel is far more democratic and more advanced in human development than any Arab state. And of course, only in Israel is that half of the population given full human rights. Handing control of the Middle East over to the Jews is such a terrific idea. In fact, many of you may be thinking, hey, maybe the Jews should run America too. Of course, some anti-Semites believe the Jews already run America, but that's ridiculous. If the Jews ran America, we wouldn't be $14 trillion in debt.
You know, the motto of Prager University is you give us 5 minutes and we'll give you a semester. Well, I took many semesters on the question of the Middle East conflict. I was at the Middle East Institute, in fact, at Columbia University. That's where I did my graduate work. Semester after semester discussing the Middle East conflict as if it were the most complex conflict in the world, when in fact it's probably the easiest conflict in the world to describe. It may be the hardest to solve, but it really is the easiest to describe. And really, in a nutshell, this is what it is. Israel would like to exist and recognizes the right of the Palestinians to have a state. The Palestinians, however, and many other Muslims and Arabs, do not recognize the right of a Jewish state of Israel to exist. Every poll among Palestinians shows that the majority of Palestinians want there to be no Jewish state of Israel, doesn't believe that it should exist or had any basis for being. And this has been true since 1948, when the British left and the UN established a division. Palestine will be cut in half, a Jewish half and an Arab half. The Jews accepted it, the Arabs didn't accept it, and what happened the moment it was announced? Arab armies, about 7 Arab armies, attacked the Jewish state in order to destroy it. To everybody's surprise, the little Jewish state survived, and that was pretty much it. And then it happened again in 1967 when the dictator of Egypt, Gamal Abdel Nasser, said we are now going to extinguish the Jewish state of Israel. And Jordan joined him and Syria joined him, but Israel attacked first, and so Israel survived. And that is how Israel, and only that way, came to occupy what was called the West Bank of Jordan, where many Palestinians lived, because many Palestinians lived in that part of Jordan. So the war was over in '67, and what did the Arabs do? The Arab states all went to Khartoum, Sudan, and announced no recognition, no peace, and no negotiations. The 3 famous no's. What was Israel supposed to do? Then Israel made an agreement to give the entire Sinai Peninsula, an area of land bigger than Israel, with oil, back to Egypt, because they said they would make peace with Israel. Israel gives territory back for peace, and it will always do that. But is there really a desire for peace on the part of Israel's enemies, which broadcast after broadcast on TV and radio in the Palestinian areas is about how Jews should be killed and how Allah wants Jews to be killed? That's the typical broadcast on Palestinian television. And so it's not hard to explain the Middle East dispute. One side wants the other dead. You know what the motto of Hamas is? The motto of Hamas is, "We love death as much as the Jews love life." Now you tell me, how is Israel supposed to make peace when people believe what Hamas believes? Now here is one of the most important things nobody talks about. Everybody talks about a Palestinian state. Why didn't anybody talk about a Palestinian state while the Palestinians lived under Jordanian rule? Because the truth is, people started talking about a Palestinian state once the Palestinians were under Israeli rule, because it was always a way to destroy the Jewish state of Israel. And I say Jewish state because that's what it is. There are many, many Arab states, but there's only one Jewish state. It is about the size of New Jersey. In fact, Israel is the size of El Salvador. El Salvador. And yet, if a Martian came to the earth and they visited the United Nations, or they read the world's newspapers or watched world television, they would believe that the biggest problem on earth is a state the size of New Jersey and El Salvador, this state of Israel. This preoccupation with a little democratic, humane state is absolutely irrational. And here's another question to be asked. If Israel tomorrow put down its arms and said, "We will fight no more," what would happen? If the Arab countries around Israel said, "We will fight no more, we put down our arms," what would happen? In the first case, there would be an immediate destruction of the state of Israel, with mass murder of the Jews of Israel. In the second scenario I presented, where the Arabs put down their arms and said, "We just want peace," there would be peace the next Wednesday. The fact is, as I said at the outset, it is a very simple problem to describe. One side wants the other dead. And if they didn't, there would be peace. And yet, please remember this. There has never been, never in the history of the world, a state in that area, in what is called geographically Palestine, that was not Jewish. Israel is the third autonomous Jewish state to exist in that area. There was never an autonomous Arab state. There was never an autonomous Muslim state. There was never an autonomous any other state. That's the issue. Why can't a little state the size of El Salvador that calls itself Israel be allowed to exist? That, in a nutshell, is the Middle East problem. I'm Dennis Prager.
So as Israel's prime minister, I didn't come here to win applause. I came here to speak the truth. The truth is, that Israel wants peace. The truth is that I want peace. The truth is that in the Middle East, at all times, but especially during these turbulent days, peace must be anchored in security. The truth is that we cannot achieve peace through UN resolutions, but only through direct negotiations between the parties. The truth is that so far the Palestinians have refused to negotiate. The truth is that Israel wants peace with a Palestinian state, but the Palestinians want a state without peace. And the truth is, you shouldn't let that happen. Leaders must see reality as it is, not as it ought to be. And the world around Israel is definitely becoming more dangerous. Militant Islam has already taken over Lebanon and Gaza. It's determined to tear apart the peace treaties between Israel and Egypt and between Israel and Jordan. It's poisoned many Arab minds against Jews in Israel, against America and the West. It opposes not the policies of Israel, but the existence of Israel. In 2000, Israel made a sweeping peace offer that met virtually all of the Palestinian demands. Arafat rejected it. Prime Minister Olmert afterwards made an even more sweeping offer in 2008. President Abbas didn't even respond to it. But Israel did more than just make sweeping offers. We actually left territory. We withdrew from Lebanon in 2000 and from every square inch of Gaza in 2005. That didn't calm the Islamic storm, the militant Islamic storm that threatens us. It only brought the storm closer and made it stronger. Hezbollah and Hamas fired thousands of rockets against our cities from the very territories we vacated. The core of the conflict is not the settlements. The settlements are a result of the conflict. The settlements have to be, it's an issue that has to be addressed and resolved in the course of negotiations. But the core of the conflict has always been, and unfortunately remains, the refusal of the Palestinians to recognize a Jewish state in any border. I think it's time that the Palestinian leadership recognizes what every serious international leader has recognized. From Lord Balfour and Lord George in 1917 to President Truman in 1948 to President Obama just 2 days ago right here. Israel is the Jewish state.
have a very special treat for you. Academy Award-winning actor Jon Voight is with us.
Hey, Casey.
He is one of the keynote speakers, Governor Schwarzenegger among others who will be here. Mr. Voight, tell me why you're here and what you plan on telling the crowd today.
Well, the reason why I'm here is because I'm a big supporter of Israel. I was in Sderot, which is, you know, the town that's been hit by so many missiles.
Right.
Of course, we know, Casey, that when Gaza, in a plea for peace in that area, was given over to the Palestinians, the so-called Palestinians, that since that time, thousands of rockets have been launched into Israel. And I went to Sderot a couple of years ago, and I believe you had that experience as well.
Right.
So you know that they're launching rockets into the civilian population, and no one is outraged by that. But then we see that Israel goes to investigate these ships, you know, through a legitimate blockade, and meets up with a prepared resistance now we understand paid mercenaries who were on that boat and would receive their pay only if they created violence.
We've got about 30 seconds left, but what we want to talk about, there's been so much attention with the flotilla, but this is obviously much bigger. The conflict between the Israelis and the Palestinians, that's what this is about.
Our president, unfortunately, has put Israel in harm's way, and this is the first president to do so, and I will say that up here. But we've got to understand the fragility of that state and learn a lesson from World War II.
Israel transfers approximately 260 trucks carrying 6,000 tons of goods to Gaza every day. Recently, over the course of a week in May 2011, 1,248 trucks were transferred from Israel to Gaza, 385 trucks carrying food, 340 trucks carrying construction material, and 523 trucks carrying a variety of other goods, for a total of 34,012 tons of products altogether. Israel has the ability to transfer twice the amount of goods entering the Gaza Strip every day. That is 400 trucks carrying 12,000 tons of goods a day, 60,000 tons of goods a week, 260,000 tons of goods a month, and 3,120,000 tons of goods a year. Ultimately, however, demands for amounts of goods come from the Palestinian people. To give some perspective, the last flotilla to Gaza carried only 4,000 tons of goods to the Gaza Strip, consisting mostly of expired medical equipment. This makes up just 2/3 of what Israel transfers to Gaza daily. So where does the real help come from?
I wanted to be a shaheed. I wasn't that lucky. Third time lucky, inshallah, I'll be shaheed.
ونحن نطردهم إلى البحر بإذن الله.
الذين يتمنون الشهادة في سبيل الله، هم كما يطمعوا أن يصلوا إلى غزة، ولكن الأخرى هي أحب إلى نفوسهم.
الآن نحن إما إحدى الحسنيين، إما الشهادة وإما الوصول إلى غزة.
גולשים אל הגג תוך דקה מתחילת הגלישה. במהלך הדקות הראשונות מתפתח עימות אלים על הגג. כל חייל שגולש מותקף על ידי 2 עד 4 פעילים המשתמשים בסכינים, במוטות ברזל ובגרזנים. החייל השני שגלש נורה בבטנו על ידי אחד הפעילים. החיילים שנתקלים בסכנת חיים נאלצים להשתמש בנשק חם. במהלך הקרב נפצעים 5 חיילים מדקירות, ממכות ומירי. 3 חיילים מושלכים מגג האונייה לסיפון ונלקחים לבטן האונייה. עם הנפילה אחד מהם נדקר בבטנו ובידו. בפעם השנייה, החיילים מזהים שמבוצע לעברם ירי משתי דפנות האונייה. כמו כן, הם נתקלים גם הפעם בהתנגדות אלימה.
The Middle East stands at a fateful crossroads, for an epic battle is now underway between tyranny and freedom. And like all of you, I pray that the peoples of the region choose the path less traveled, the path of liberty. Israel has always embraced this path. In a region where women are stoned, gays are hanged, Christians are persecuted, Israel stands out. It is different. We have a free press, independent courts, an open economy. Courageous Arab protesters are now struggling to secure these very same rights for their peoples, for their societies. We're proud in Israel that over 1 million Arab citizens of Israel have been enjoying these rights for decades. Of the 300 million Arabs in the Middle East and North Africa, only Israel's Arab citizens enjoy real democratic rights. I want you to stop for a second and think about that. Of those 300 million Arabs, less than 0.5% are truly free, and they're all citizens of Israel. This startling fact reveals a basic truth. Israel is not what is wrong about the Middle East. Israel is what is right about the Middle East.
سيدي الرئيس، ما هي الرسالة التي تريد أن توصلها إلى الشعب الفلسطيني بشكل عام والأطفال فلسطين بشكل خاص؟
هذا الطفل اللي بيمسك الحجر قدام الدبابة مش أكبر رسالة للعالم وبيستشهد هذا البطل؟ احنا فخورين بهم.
انت بوعيك حكيت عن الشهادة كشيء جميل، انت بتعتقد انه شيء جميل؟
الشهادة كتير شيء جميل جدا جدا، كل الناس بتتمنى الشهادة.
ايوه،
لانه يعني ايش في احلى من انك تروحي على الجنة.
طب مين افضل، السلام مع وجود حقوق كاملة للشعب الفلسطيني ولا الشهادة؟
الشهادة. انا اخذ حقي بعدين استشهد.
ماشي. يسرا، انت راضية بالكلام هذا؟
طبعا الشهادة احلى. اخذوا فكرة عندهم مثلا انه موت شهادة، وهذا اشي كتير كويس، انه مثلا كل طفل فلسطيني ولد مثلا قول له عمره 12 سنة يا رب استشهد.
اللي ابني شهيد ومش شهيد ابني بس، كلهم اولادي، كل الشهداء اولادي، والحمد لله الى الفخر والاعتزاز. اولادي كلهم السبعة انا مقدماهم للقدس.
بدي احمل مدفع وبارودي، وبكره لما يقوم الحرب لا يهمنا انتم ولا غربي، وبكره لما يقوم الحرب لا يهمنا انتم ولا غربي، واسرائيل رح تنزل درب، واسرائيل رح تنزل درب. سبيل الله قومنا نبتغي اللواء، فليعد للدين مجده والتراب منا الدماء.
Look how the parents dress their children.
Se hvordan foreldrene kler opp barna sine.
Little innocent children.
Små uskyldige barn.
They dress them up like a walking bomb.
De kler dem opp som en vandrende bombe.
And these poor children don't even know what's happening to them.
Og disse stakkars barna, de vet ikke engang hva som skjer med dem.
Using civilians as a means to achieving military goals is considered a war crime and a gross violation of the international laws governing armed conflict. Israel sees the use of human shields not only as a violation of international and national law, but as anathema to the moral and ethical underpinnings of its own society. For Palestinian terrorist organizations led by Hamas, using innocent civilians for both offensive and defensive purposes is not a moral aberration, but a fundamental element of their combat doctrine. Human shielding involves the intentional placement of innocent civilians in harm's way in order to protect the lives of combatants or hide illicit military actions. The forceful sacrifice of an innocent sanctity of life is considered a war crime, but first and foremost, it is a reprehensible violation of the universal concept of human decency. Hamas has fully integrated human shielding as a basic element of its terrorist doctrine. Civilians, including women and children, are also exploited by being placed at military targets which Hamas expects to be attacked.
المواطنون وفور سماع نبأ التهديد باستهداف المنزل خرجوا من منازلهم متوجهين إلى منزل الجعابير ليشكلوا دروعا بشرية في محاولة لمنع قصف المنزل.
ولذلك أصبح الموت عند الشعب الفلسطيني صناعة تجيده النساء، تجيده كل من في هذه الأرض. ذلك شكلوا دروعا بشرية من النساء والأطفال والشيوخ.
I was also outlined a vision for a secure Israeli-Palestinian peace. I intend to speak the unvarnished truth. So now here's the question. You've got to ask. If the benefits of peace with the Palestinians are so clear, why has peace eluded us? Because all 6 Israeli prime ministers, since the signing of the Oslo Accords, agreed to establish a Palestinian state, myself included. So why has peace not been achieved? Because so far, the Palestinians have been unwilling to accept a Palestinian state if it meant accepting a Jewish state alongside it. You see, our conflict has never been about the establishment of a Palestinian state. It's always been about the existence of the Jewish state. This is what this conflict is about. In recent years, Israel withdrew from South Lebanon and from Gaza. We thought we'd get peace. That's not what we got. We got 12,000 rockets fired from those areas on our cities, on our children, by Hezbollah and Hamas. The UN peacekeepers in Lebanon, they failed to prevent the smuggling of this weaponry. The European observers in Gaza, they evaporated overnight. So if Israel simply walked out of the territories, the flow of weapons into a future Palestinian state would be unchecked, and missiles fired from it could reach virtually every home in Israel. I want you to think about that too. Imagine there's a siren going on now, and we have less than 60 seconds to find shelter from an incoming rocket. Would you live that way? Do you think anybody can live that way? Well, we're not going to live that way either. But peace can only be negotiated with partners committed to peace. And Hamas is not a partner for peace. Hamas remains committed to Israel's destruction and to terrorism. They have a charter. That charter not only calls for the obliteration of Israel, it says, kill the Jews everywhere you find them. Hamas's leader condemned the killing of Osama bin Laden and praised him as a holy warrior. Israel is prepared to sit down today. I believe we can fashion a brilliant future for our children. But Israel will not negotiate with a Palestinian government backed by the Palestinian version of Al-Qaeda. That we will not do.
The Obama administration has strongly condemned Palestinian glorification of terrorists and says it imperils peace. But Palestinian President Abbas recently promoted a terrorist who planned the killing of 3 Americans and supported naming a city square after the leader of an attack that killed 37 civilians. And Prime Minister Fayyad just sponsored a sports tournament for teens named after terror mastermind Abu Jihad. If terrorists are glorified, how can there be peace?
أبعث بأسماء آيات التقدير والاحترام لكل أسرانا وأسيراتنا في سجون الاحتلال، وفي المقدمة منهم القدامى، وعلى رأسهم عميد الأسرى سعيد العتبة، القيادات السياسية مروان البرغوثي، أحمد سعدات، وعزيز جمال حويل، وجمال الطراوي، هم جميعا منا ومن كل شعبنا التحية.
اللهم انصر الإسلام والمسلمين، اللهم اعل بفضلك كلمة الحق والدين، اللهم اهلك الكفرة والمجرمين، اللهم انصرنا على أعدائك أعدائنا يا رب العالمين.
الدولة اليهودية، ايش دولة اليهودية؟ احنا بنقول دولة اسرائيل. انا بقبلش، وهي بحكي على الهواء هلا مش انا ما عندي مش شغلتي اعطي وصفا لهذه الدولة شو فيها. يا أخي سموا حالكم الجمهورية الصهيونية العبرية الوطنية الاشتراكية سموها اللي بدكم، أنا مالي دعوة.
لو أتت كل اليهود واستجارت بالقرود واشتكت منها الأسود عذرانا لن نعود. ليس للقدس بديل، في فلسطين بواسل أن رأت ظلما تقاتل. موتنا مثل الحياة، موطني كبر الغزاة، سوف أمشي 1000 ميل لو أموت فيها شهيد. ومعا وسويا نحو القدس، نحو القدس، نحو القدس.
يا ملائكة الرحمة زفي أرواحنا إلى عليين بعد أن نؤدي الواجب بسحق أحفاد القردة والخنازير. أبي الغالي أم الحنون أحييكم تحية إجلال وإكبار وأنتم تزفونني إلى الحور العين شهيدا.
أما رسالتي إلى اليهود الحاقدين فوالله الذي لا إله إلا هو سنلاحقكم في كل مكان، فنحن قوم نشرب الدم وعلمنا أنه لا دم أطيب من دم يهود، فلن نترككم حتى نشبع من دماءكم ونشبع أطفالنا من دمائكم، ولن يهدأ لنا بال حتى تخرجوا من بلاد المسلمين.
احنا لحالنا الصغار البنات والأولاد الشباب بنروح بنروح كل حالنا بنروح بنطقهم كلهم، بس يعطونا السلاحات هسه حيقطونا. اعطوني البنات والشباب لحالهم، بس اعطوني بقتلوهم كلياتهم، ما بنخليش ولا يهودي لحال، ما بنخليش ولا يهودي هنا.
Now, some argue that the spread of militant Islam, especially in these turbulent times, if you want to slow it down, they argue, Israel must hurry to make concessions, to make territorial compromises. And this theory sounds simple. Basically, it goes like this: leave the territory and peace will be advanced. The moderates will be strengthened, the radicals will be kept at bay, and don't worry about the pesky details of how Israel will actually defend itself. International troops will do the job. These people say to me constantly, just make a sweeping offer and everything will work out. You know, there's only one problem with that theory. We've tried it, and it hasn't worked. We left Gaza hoping for peace. We did freeze the settlements in Gaza. We uprooted them. We did exactly what the theory says. Get out, go back to the 1967 borders, dismantle the settlements. And I don't think people remember how far we went to achieve this. We uprooted thousands of people from their homes. We pulled children out of their schools and their kindergartens. We bulldozed synagogues. We even moved loved ones from their graves. And then, having done all that, we gave the keys of Gaza to President Abbas. Now the theory says it should all work out. And President Abbas and the Palestinian Authority now could build a peaceful state in Gaza. But ladies and gentlemen, we didn't get peace. We got Iran, which through its proxy Hamas promptly kicked out the Palestinian Authority. The Palestinian Authority collapsed in a day, in one day. President Abbas just said on this podium that the Palestinians are armed only with their hopes and dreams. Yeah, hopes, dreams, and 10,000 missiles and Grad rockets supplied by Iran, not to mention the river of lethal weapons now flowing into Gaza from the Sinai, from Libya, and from elsewhere. Thousands of missiles have already rained down on our cities. So, you might understand that given all this, Israelis rightly ask, what's to prevent this from happening again in the West Bank? Hezbollah and Hamas fired thousands of rockets against our cities from the very territories we vacated. Israelis remember the bitter lessons of Gaza. Many of Israel's critics ignore them. They irresponsibly advise Israel to go down this same perilous path again. You read what these people say and it's as if nothing happened. Just keep repeating the same advice, the same formulas, as though none of this happened. And these critics continue to press Israel to make far-reaching concessions without first assuring Israel's security. They praise those who unwittingly feed the insatiable crocodile of militant Islam as bold statesmen. They cast as enemies of peace those of us who insist that we must first erect a sturdy barrier to keep the crocodile out, or at the very least, jam an iron bar between its gaping jaws. So in the face of the labels and the libels, Israel must heed better advice. Better a bad press than a good eulogy. And better still would be a fair press, whose sense of history extends beyond breakfast, and which recognizes Israel's legitimate security concerns.
Thank you, Mr. President. I am the former commander of British forces in Afghanistan. I served with NATO and the United Nations, commanded troops in Northern Ireland, Bosnia and Macedonia, and participated in the Gulf War. I spent considerable time in Iraq since the 2003 invasion and worked on international terrorism for the UK government's Joint Intelligence Committee. Mr. President, based on my knowledge and experience, I can say this. During Operation Cast Lead, the Israeli did more to safeguard the rights of civilians in a combat zone than any other army in the history of warfare. Israel did so while facing an enemy that deliberately positioned its military capability behind the human shield of the civilian population. Hamas, like Hezbollah, are expert at driving the media agenda. Both will always have people ready to give interviews condemning Israeli forces for war crimes. They are adept at staging and distorting incidents. The IDF faces a challenge that we British do not have to face to the same extent. It is the automatic Pavlovian presumption by many in the international media and international human rights groups that the IDF are in the wrong, that they are abusing human rights. The truth is that the IDF took extraordinary measures to give Gaza of targeted areas, dropping over 2 million leaflets and making over 100,000 phone calls. Many missions that could have taken out Hamas military capability were aborted to prevent civilian casualties. During the conflict, the IDF allowed huge amounts of humanitarian aid into Gaza. To deliver aid virtually into your enemy's hands is, to the military tactician, normally quite unthinkable. But the IDF took on those risks. Despite all of this, of course innocent civilian lives were lost. War is chaos and full of mistakes. There have been mistakes by the British, American and other forces in Afghanistan and in Iraq, many of which can be put down to human error. But mistakes are not war crimes. More than anything, the civilian casualties were a consequence of Hamas's way of fighting. Hamas deliberately tried to sacrifice its own civilians. Mr. President, Israel had no choice, apart from defending its people, to stop Hamas from attacking them with rockets. And I say this again, the IDF did more to safeguard the rights of civilians in a combat zone than any other army in the history of warfare. Thank you, Mr. President.
Often on the news, we hear the terms occupied territories, 67 borders, and illegal settlements. And the story we usually hear sounds very simple. During the Six-Day War, Israel captured the West Bank from the Palestinians, refused the United Nations' demand to retreat, and illegally built settlements. But is that really the case? We'll start with a simple but extremely important question. From whom did Israel capture the West Bank? From the Palestinians? No. In 1967, there was no Arab nation or state by the name of Palestine. Actually, was there ever? So, whose territory is it? Until 1917, the Ottoman Empire occupied the whole region. After losing in World War I, the Ottomans relinquished their 500-year control to the Allied forces, which decided to divide the old empire into countries. Britain recognized the Jewish people's historical right to their homeland. A small area, equivalent to about 0.5% of the Middle East, was designated for this purpose. But wait a second, do you realize what happened? The Jewish homeland originally included not only the West Bank, but also the East Bank of the Jordan River. I guess you cannot say the Jewish people have not accepted some painful compromises already. With the British mandate ending, United Nations General Assembly Resolution 181 recommended the establishment of two states, one Jewish and one Arab. The Jews accepted it and went on to create the State of Israel, while the Arabs refused the compromise and launched a war to destroy the newly established Jewish state. At the end of the war, a ceasefire line was formed, where the Israeli and Arab forces stopped fighting. At the insistence of the Arab leaders, this line was defined as having no political significance. So, although this line is commonly referred to as the 1967 border, it is not from 1967, and it was never an international border. So, let's return for a moment to our illustration and examine the complete chain of events. Israel's presence in the West Bank is the result of a war of self-defense. The West Bank should not be considered occupied because there was no previous legal sovereign in the area, and therefore the real definition should be disputed territory. The 1947 partition plan has no current legal standing, while Israel's claim to the land was clearly recognized by the international community during the 20th century. That is why the presence and construction of Israeli settlements in the West Bank should not be considered illegal. So what's the solution for the dispute over the West Bank? Unfortunately, there is no magic solution. But the only way a solution will ever be reached is if we base our negotiations on legal and historical facts. So please, let's stop using the terms occupied territories and 67 borders. They're simply not politically correct.
Israel, like any other country, has the right and the obligation to protect its citizens from harm. Terror organizations operating with the ruling power in Gaza, Hamas, intentionally target Israeli civilians with rocket attacks and infiltrate Israeli territory to commit terrorist attacks. This situation, in which Israel's civilians have been under constant terrorist attacks, has forced Israel to undertake necessary security measures in order to protect its people.
The name West Bank was coined by Jordan during its illegal occupation of the area between 1949 and 1967. For thousands of years, the area was known as Judea and Samaria, the birthplace of Judaism. The only time in over 1,000 years that Jews were prohibited from living in the West Bank was during Jordan's illegal occupation. There has never been a Palestinian Arab state prior to the one currently being proposed. The Green Line was never an internationally recognized border, but rather the ceasefire line from 1949. UN Resolution 242 states that future secure borders were to be agreed upon through negotiations. The perimeters of the built-up areas of Israeli settlement cover approximately 1.7% of the territory, or 5 to 8% if we include the security fence. 75 to 80% of West Bank Israelis live in communities close to the Green Line. During the Oslo peace process in 1993, it was mutually agreed to divide the West Bank into regions, A, B, and C. 98% of West Bank Palestinians live in Palestinian-governed areas A and B. Less than 2% live in Israeli-administered Area C. The Palestinians have communities on 40% of the West Bank, and approximately 60% of the West Bank is virtually empty.
Despite the fact that Hamas operates from civilian areas, the IDF has consistently taken measures to minimize casualties to innocent bystanders by placing phone calls, recorded warnings, and leaflets, all intended to alert civilian bystanders. Deploying weapon systems which enable pinpoint accuracy in order to minimize collateral damage. Delaying ground and aerial strikes in populated areas, or even canceling them altogether whenever collateral damage to civilians is likely. For more information, click the link below.
Ten facts about Hamas. The Hamas is a Palestinian Islamic organization founded in 1987 in Gaza as an offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood movement. The Hamas Charter explicitly calls for the obliteration of Israel. The Charter repeats medieval and Nazi anti-Semitic rhetoric accusing Jews of controlling the world media and of causing all the world's past wars and revolutions. Hamas is responsible for 40% of suicide terror attacks in Israel, which resulted in hundreds of civilian casualties. In June 2007, Hamas seized control over the Gaza Strip and began imposing an extremist religious rule. Hamas government is responsible for extrajudicial executions of all opposition, persecution of journalists, and shutting down human rights organizations. Hamas persecutes Gaza's Christians. Between the years 2007 and 2011, the Christian population in Gaza has dropped by 45%. Between 2001 and 2012, Hamas has fired 12,000 rockets into Israel, more than 9,000 of them after Israel withdrew completely from Gaza in 2005, and evacuated thousands of Israeli families in the hopes of achieving peace. Hamas war tactics include placing ammunition and rocket launchers in hospitals and mosques and near schools, in violation of the Geneva Convention. Hamas is supported by Iran, from which it receives an estimated $300 million per year, military training, and rockets which are fired into Israel's civilian towns. The United States, the European Union, Canada, and Japan all classify Hamas as a terrorist organization. For more facts, please visit us at www.standwithus.com.
I will talk the dangers of a nuclear-armed Iran. A nuclear-armed Iran would ignite a nuclear arms race in the Middle East. It would give terrorists a nuclear umbrella. It would make the nightmare of nuclear terrorism a clear and present danger throughout the world. I want you to understand what this means, because if we don't stop it, it's coming. They could put a bomb anywhere. They could put it in a missile. They could put it on a ship inside a container. They could eventually put it in a suitcase or in a subway. In much of the international community, the calls for our destruction are met with utter silence. It's even worse, because there are many who rush to condemn Israel for defending itself against Iran's terror proxies. If history has taught the Jewish people anything, it is that we must take calls for our destruction seriously. We are a nation that rose from the ashes of the Holocaust. When we say never again, we mean never again. Israel always reserves the right to defend itself. My friends, while Israel will be ever vigilant in its defense, we'll never give up our quest for peace.